the fear comes from the unknown. The unknown doesn't become known by sitting there still,
Welcome to the New Generation Leader Podcast. We're giving you the tools you need to lead in the digital world. Ready to reach your true potential? This is the New Generation Leader Podcast.
You've become this voice for AI in and around Richmond. Obviously, you have a foundation and a motivation for bringing this conversation to the table and the region, inviting people to it. Where does that motivation come from within you to pioneer something?
I can answer that 3 different ways, but I'll try to do it in 2. So the first thing is I was at the right place at the right time. So a series of events happened to kind of put me in the position to be the voice in Richmond for AI. It was not what I set out to do in the beginning. But the Chamber RVA delegation was in DC visiting with our legislators. Mark Warner came in to talk with us. He'd just met with Sam Altman that morning. And so he was just really excited in all the ways about AI, not necessarily in the positive ways, but just we need to pay attention to this kind of thing. And there was a couple of folks who were there that when we came back to the executive committee meeting at the chamber and kind of reported out on this exchange and the overall trip that we took up there. And there's a couple of us that just said, something's going on here. We need to pay attention to this moment. Maybe we need to do something here in Richmond. And so what ended up happening, Chamber RVA is a 150-year-old or 160-year-old organization, something like that. And so they don't move quickly. And it's good that they don't move quickly. There's some organizations you kind of want to have be pretty steady. But in this time, AI is changing things so fast. And we can, as a community, embrace that and do something with it. Or we can bury our heads in the sand and somebody else will have that opportunity and run with it. And so as we look to the future for Richmond specifically, and I've been here since 2017. I love Richmond. It's my home. And I learned, through Leadership Metro Richmond back in 2020, a lot of the challenges that this region faces. And one of the things that I remembered hearing back then was that something like 20% of the Richmond population lives in poverty. And to me, that's an incredibly high number. And I imagine it mirrors a lot of the rest of the country, a lot of other cities. But there are also some people in Richmond who have, never been given an opportunity. And I say that generationally. You can go back many generations and nobody in their family has been given that opportunity. And just through their set of circumstances, they haven't been exposed to the opportunities that might spark that inspiration in them. And so for something that's moving fast and for the sake that we could potentially get some of those people on board, maybe, just maybe, we can draw some of those people out of their state, get them up the ladder a little bit. But I believe that collectively, if we embrace this and we share with each other and we help people learn, and, we can be an incredibly powerful region. We can attract high-skilled talent that want to come work for these companies. We can leverage the tax dollars from that growth to be able to build more housing. So we need to do that to be able to make it all work. I think that Richmond has been, not so much anymore, but for a long time, whether it was regional division or internal division, or just decades upon decades of, neglect in certain areas of our community, that's how it was. Does not mean it's how it has to be. So I think that this is a catalyst moment for us to say, that's who we were, and it's not who we are going to be. And so that's my hope. A lot of things happened. People came to the table. It's like a center of gravity that people have been sucked into. And as far as AI Ready RVA goes, which is the organization we started, I'm very much involved in it on a regular basis, but from a leadership perspective, from a visibility perspective, I've pulled back a whole lot. You don't see me at a lot of the events. I've got other things going on that I'm interested in, but behind the scenes, we're constantly thinking about how do we walk the talk. And just yesterday, we launched a new website that was entirely coded with AI, and it runs our entire organization. It runs our events. It takes our money. It does our membership subscriptions. It checks people in at events and prints out their name tag. It allows people to start cohorts and manage our cohorts. It has a bunch of resources for people to learn AI. And we're really proud of that. Honestly, it's been a long time coming to get to that. But it's also the tools have matured, and we've had a lot more technical ability more recently as AI has kind of matured itself.
As you look across the country to metro areas, other similar cities, regions, communities, anybody else pioneering this kind of movement like Richmond is?
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, there are a number of places who have not only started and embraced and created community, but they have found ways to fund that as well. And so I want to say 2 weeks ago now, New Jersey announced an AI hub for the state. And I'm not going to get everything right, but I think it's Princeton, Microsoft, the state of New Jersey, and one other company that I'm going to draw a blank on, CoreWeave maybe. And the four of them have formed a new LLC to be able to create this AI hub. And it's funded already, I want to say, with something like, this is a weird range. It's either $3 or $20 million. My memory's not that perfect around it. I think that they had seeded it with 3, and I think that they've secured additional funding since then. But they announced all this a couple weeks ago. They've already secured physical location, have announced that they're welcoming people to apply to rent their spaces and their co-working spaces, kind of part of what makes the hub a hub. And we are, similarly, a couple years in, and we have, $60,000 in the bank and no major commitments from the state or from the city or, regional economic development partners. There's everything that AI Ready RVA is doing is being done because the community is showing up to events and paying $15 a month as an advocate subscriber, or companies that have seen that they need talent and they're finding it in the rooms that we're assembling. It's taken us a little bit longer to get traction, and I think our community as a whole, Richmond, is a slower moving community. It is a little more skeptical of change, but there's a lot of really smart people in this community, leaders, who they're not burying their heads in the sand. They're just not aligned on how to align, around this technology. But it's happening. It's slowly happening.
Somebody mentioned yesterday that Richmond's a very relationally driven community. It seems like we're on the cusp of a new season, a new day. There are new companies that are making a splash in the region. There's new leaders coming in. There's lots of people coming in, and it seems like strong leadership in all of the regional partners. As you look at your own work, I want to go to something you said a few minutes ago, that you've pulled back because there are other things you're interested in working on. You seem to have been in a consistent posture of innovation and growth and experimentation. Take me back. What was the earliest in your life where you started tinkering, experimenting, and building?
I've always been entrepreneurial. Even when I was a kid, I would rake leaves and mow lawns and do odd jobs for money. And that was motivated by not having any. Our family was poor. My father was sick. My mom worked 3 jobs at times, and we still didn't always have what we needed to make ends meet. And I was determined to not live that life as an adult. My mom, remarried after my father passed away, and life stabilized for me as a teenager. But I didn't come from a family where they were going to pay for travel. I didn't play sports, but travel sports, or like new shoes and, like the stuff that makes kids cool. I didn't have any of that stuff. So I knew that I was going to have to be the driver of my adult future. And so I bought into a business when I was 20 years old as a means to secure my future. So entrepreneurship first, ownership first. And it wasn't a lot. I think my initial investment into that was like $25,000. And then ever since then, I've been self-employed. So that has forced me to figure it out. There's no plan B. There's no other job I'm going to go get someplace. I've thought about it many times over when things get really hard, and the same sentiment comes up. It's like, you're never going to be able to work for somebody else. And part of the reason for that is that, all the things that I've ever started, I've never wanted to run. Like, I don't say never, but there always is a point where I'm like, this isn't exciting to me anymore. This isn't interesting to me anymore. Managing a status quo is not what I get excited about. Starting things is a lot more interesting, and it's like a playground. When you start something, there are no rules. Maybe you have an idea about what it is you're trying to solve, or what value you're trying to create that you want to create a market for, but you're doing it because you have an idea about one of those two things, or both. It's play, before it's work. It's always play before it's work. And so for me, it's an opportunity to say, can we come up with something that addresses this problem that might make somebody else happy, or that will eliminate some kind of friction that they experience? Because I think one of the things I'm doing in my life, if I think about all my behavior, it's about improving the quality of life for other people. because we've all had negative experiences in our life that make us uncomfortable and that we'd rather avoid or help other people avoid. We have to experience the bad to appreciate the good. So we're all going to have negative experiences in our lives. But by and large, my experience has been that most of life is positive. Most of life is good. And so we should never hide from the things that we want to try or do. We shouldn't worry too much about what other people are going to say about what we're doing. And we should allow ourselves to be okay with the decision to stop doing something that we started if we just decided it's not exciting anymore. And so I think a lot of it for me has just been avoiding having to manage something that is a status quo sort of operation. And even within my business, I mean, our Exponent 21 is 10 years old as of last year. And for, the latter part of that decade, I was bored. We were managing same clients for years. We were delivering the same services more or less for years. We were tweaking the strategy a little bit, but there were no big changes in how we met the moment for our clients until, Google put AI overviews at the top of search. And that was May of 2024. And kind of leaned into the moment last year and found a wedge to enter the marketplace and steal attention and grow from there. So we're no longer managing a status quo business. We're managing a growth business. And that's incredibly fun for me. So I'm having fun building new tools to be able to aid in that growth and also being a better leader and helping the people who are on the team grow in their own ways to contribute to the overall organization.
There's almost two thoughts or two camps that we often find when we're looking at companies. There's the founding stage, which takes somebody like you who wants to take on new territory, chase an idea, build something, create something. And then there's the operationalizing phase where you've got to get the house in order before you can innovate again. A lot of founders, it seems, stay too long until they're burned out and they leave. And they struggle with changing. You said the business had reached
whether it's status quo business.
Status quo,
business.
yes.
Yeah.
Leaders struggle with the status quo phase as a new phase and struggle to rediscover the energy to exit out of that. What did you find in that journey to help support you, to help run the status quo side of the business? Because I'm sure there's still operation of the business that feels status quo to you and is not as exciting and sexy as building something.
Yeah, so for every person that gets excited by new ideas and building something, there are 10 people who are afraid to death and would rather do anything else. And so, and maybe not afraid to death is the right word, but they don't yet have the confidence to pursue that new bold thing because there are sacrifices that you have to make to get there. So the answer is a great team. Other people who have different personality traits and working modes than I do, who want to write SOPs and, want to build automation solutions to be able to improve our workflows and things like that. So I don't spend a lot of time on those things. I spend a lot of time building infrastructure software to be able to more efficiently manage what we do. It's still playground territory for me. It's not rules based. It's what can we do to make it better? We know where the friction is, and that's, let's go tackle those things. When I was younger, I was more inclined to do the exciting things only. And as I've gotten older, I've really appreciated the value of the foundational steps that you need to take. So like data collection, for instance, like you need to have a good foundational process in place to be able to collect data so that you don't find yourself at a point of saying, hey, I need data to be able to tell this story and I haven't collected it, or I have it, but it's in disparate places and I need to go dig it up and find it. So there's a lot of best practices that businesses deploy that small businesses often will avoid because they're expensive or the founder doesn't want to do them. And I was like that in a lot of different stages of my entrepreneurial journey, but I have found over time that I appreciate very much some of those traditional business practices and things that kind of create stability for a business. And as I've gotten older, I've appreciated them much more and have prioritized them as activities that we're going to, lean into. But I'm the driver of it. I'm not sitting in the mix, day to day to make those things happen. And I don't have the time to anyway. So it's not like I'm skipping out on the work, but I'm aligning with where my interests are the most.
I'll quote the Tim Ferriss book often as a myth that we should only be working 4 hours a week and that should be our goal. And we only do the things that we absolutely love doing. And I think you're right. There's power in us growing in our appreciation for the thing that doesn't come naturally to us, but recognizing that it takes both sides to truly build something that lasts. And it sounds like in this season, your business is in that sustaining mode and you're creating legacy, not only for your team, for yourself, but for your clients as well.
It certainly feels that way. And it's not always been roses. We had post-COVID, things were rough. And we maintained the status quo during that period. And when things finally changed, it was external factors and it was also internal factors. I've told this story a few times, but I had a guy that said to me in the summer of 2024, he's like, aren't you the Richmond water guy? And I was like, yeah, I am. And he's like, I said, but you know what I do for a living? He's like, you're not the Richmond water guy? It's like, yeah, it doesn't pay my bills. And I kind of had this moment. I was like, maybe I should start marketing my agency again and trying to grow that because that does pay my bills and Richmond water doesn't. But there was a reason why I stopped. And it was because I got tired of telling people, oh, I do digital marketing. People's eyes would glaze over. They didn't want to hear about it. And now that maybe it was my perception that nobody wanted to hear about what I do. But unless you're a marketer, most people are like, this is a problem that needs to be solved. So I didn't like talking about it to people that didn't want to hear about it. And so I just stopped talking about what I did. Now, what I found during that period, and I've kind of taken this tack for a lot of my life, is if I approach relationship development without ever needing anything from anybody else, and I can sustain that for a long period of time, I become an anomaly because everybody else, has a process and they're going to say, well, I need to, by the third touch, I need to be asking for a meeting or a sale or something like that. And I just don't. And I've been able to establish a large, Rolodex and, old school term, but a large, cache of contacts that trust me and believe in me and are willing to support what I'm doing. And that makes all the things that I want to do so much easier. I can do things now that I could not do 2 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it is, because I couldn't get the flywheel going to be able to support it. And now that I've learned how to start the flywheel, I've learned how important it is to step back at a certain point and allow the people who've come to the table to be the decision makers, to be the ones that are influencing, because founders have big egos a lot of times and they like to steer things because they want to protect their vision. But I also have seen many leaders who are like that be unliked and make really poor business decisions because their ego is getting in the way of their organizational success. And so I'm kind of at the season now of needing to empower my employees as much as possible, but also recognize that it a really healthy organization stems from hiring great talent to start with and growing great talent, and not hiring anybody that shows up and trying to grow mediocre talent into great talent. It's not the best way to go. So I'm learning a lot about people, and that's always been my motivation is how to serve people. I think it's a innate part of me that I can't pick apart. I don't have the answers for that one.
You've talked a lot about what you've learned through the years. And sounds like some great insights that you've continued to stack. And that's one of the things I love to say is we don't graduate from learning. We shouldn't graduate from learning, even if we finish, middle school, high school, GED, college, career program. Even you mentioned LMR earlier. You finish a program like that goes for a year and you get a certificate. That shouldn't be the end of the journey for us. As you look back, and you mentioned earlier that you're writing a little bit about this, what would you tell yourself without giving away the entire book? But what would you tell your 20-year-old self based on what you know today as a business leader, entrepreneur, creator?
Simply be willing to fail more. I think one of the things that what happens to young people, and it's a trick that the brain plays on us all too often, even as we age, we forget that as we move through life, most of the things that we do or have done were relatively successful. They didn't crash and burn. We didn't embarrass ourselves. We didn't fall down. We forget that somehow because we're constantly faced with new ideas that we have no reference point in our memory. And so it's scary and just very innately human, instinct to be afraid of change, to be afraid of the unknown. And I think that our culture in America, and this goes back 90 years, we built a scientific society that said that, we need to have a small group of people that are prepared to lead. We need another group of people that are prepared to do the heavy lifting. And we still have a system that prepares people for a large portion of the population for the heavy lifting and not for the critical thinking and the leadership that really we need. And now we're at the phase of having all this AI stuff. The people that didn't develop the critical thinking skills, that didn't practice their creativity, those jobs are being eliminated because computers can move the information around that they were expected to move around. But here's the thing. The fear comes from the unknown. The unknown doesn't become known by sitting there still. You could read all the books in the world about a subject and you might know more, but that doesn't mean that you're prepared to do the thing. And I don't think that anybody is. I think we're all prepared enough, but not fully prepared. And we will not be until we start. And so starting is where we start to discover, well, what do we not know that we need to know? And then let's go learn that. And then let's keep going forward. I have found that I learn best by doing, and by doing as much as I can with what I know, and then getting to a stuck point and then trying to figure out what I need then, and then keep going. Because what I'm learning there is applicable to what's going on. And I'm going to retain that information much better. When I was young, they taught us all this stuff. And I was like, why do I need to know any of this stuff? I don't care about this. And what you learn later on is like, that's exposure so that you can have curiosities and interests that you can later pursue in life. And I did. I hated the core subjects, but I took newspaper, yearbook, advanced writing, photography, e-commerce, all in high school. Took me a few years, but thinking back, I was like, wait a second, my whole career has been founded on the curiosities and interests that I exhibited in high school. And then I continued to do those jobs in different capacities for the different companies that I owned or worked for. And now, I feel like I'm successful because I was willing at a very young age to say yes, to go do something that other people would say is impossible or scary, or I'm too young, or it's not for me. Nothing's for anybody. Everything's for everybody. Like nobody's out there calling the shots on what people can have. It's all up here. We're the ones who decide for ourselves. I would invite anybody. I would invite my younger self to say, it's for you. You deserve it. And nobody else can say otherwise.
It's fascinating to think about the power of the brain and how much it can shortchange us. The power of the stories that keep us from failing, because our brains are wired to diminish the negative side of our experiences to protect us. And even Jason Pfeiffer from Entrepreneur magazine is the one who I first heard say this idea. He said, go back to March of 2020. What do you remember? And people intuitively may eventually get around to, the headlines, the sky was falling, but they think about the walks around the neighborhood. Things were quiet. Life slowed down a little bit. We don't think as much about the fear of the moment and just how scary at times it felt. And then we can get overwhelmed by how big a problem is in front of us and not get started. Like you said, we read a book, we start doing it, and we think we're an expert, and we're not. And so it's just this vicious cycle. Trying to figure that out is challenging, especially in a world where, in terms of information, AI's got all the information we need at our fingertips. And so how do we be critical thinkers? My 8th grader said last week, hey, when was the last time you used the rock cycle? And our friend was standing nearby. She was studying for a test, and our friend said, yeah, but it's about the process. And like you said, it's the curiosity, it's the journey, not so much the information you're learning. I had to tell her, I don't know that I've used the rock cycle since. Quite an interesting reality for us. As much of an innovator and a creator and a builder as you are, what do you say to the people who, in terms of AI or in terms of any kind of innovation, are a little tepid towards trying it out? They aren't quite sure, is this for real? Can I trust it?
Find a buddy. I think that this is true of anything that you want to pursue. If you want to start a business, if you want to learn technology, if you want to build something, you might not want to go work for somebody for a year or two or whatever to get the skills and the knowledge that you need. But you definitely need to go spend some time with somebody who knows a little bit more about it than you do. Because if nothing else, avoiding the pitfalls is worth it. There's other people have done it the hard way and learned the hard lessons, and they're willing to share those things with you. And as long as you're not too stubborn to not take the advice, you can save yourself a lot of time. And they can also turn you on to things that you can start with early that get you ahead of things too. So I think that we're all students. We have to be students. I think to myself also, you said something earlier about how, take up a skill, we start working on it. Oh, we're all experts or whatever. And I honestly think that I don't care what field you're in, and I don't care how much experience you have. You're not an expert. There's still something that you don't know that you rely on your colleague for, or something that you haven't studied, or the edge case that you haven't encountered that will throw you for a loop. And I think that the fun of it is knowing that you're not an expert, but wanting to be more of one, better at it. Unfortunately, we live in a society where if you express any doubt or, lack of confidence in your abilities, then other people will latch onto that. And so we actually have to do this performative thing and present ourselves as experts, even if we're not fully confident in our expertise. But I do think that there's a possibility of at least getting to the place where you can present yourself with confidence and be honest about the things that you don't know. But I think we all are students all the time. And I think the thing that separates us from success is just knowing what we're passionate enough about to stick with. Because a lot of times people think that they have a passion. They think that they want to pursue something. And then they get into it and they realize they're really not that interested. And that's normal too. And I've had that happen a number of times in my life. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't still try. You should just be okay with giving up whenever it's time to give up.
I've done that for sure. And I had this story in the back of my head. The voice. Why are you not doing that anymore? That's a good word. Well, I feel like we could keep this conversation going on all day, but you and I both have meetings and work to get to. So how can people connect with you, follow along with your work?
I would say exponent21.com. That's XPONENT21.com is how you can find out more about our company. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. And then AI Ready RVA, if you're here in the Richmond region, is a really wonderful organization. There's over 10 cohorts now that are established. And last night was the nonprofit cohort that we launched with 75 people in the first event. And there's a lot of energy there for people who are maybe still not comfortable with it yet. And they'll find that the people they meet there are at all different levels.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to all that in the show notes. Thanks, Will. Appreciate it.
Thank you. This is great. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the New Generation Leader podcast. Subscribe today on your podcasting platform. Download the show notes and unlock your true leadership potential at newgenerationleader.fm. Thanks for listening today, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the New Generation Leader podcast.